Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International on tonight's headlines. The Russian Defense Ministry announced a local ceasefire to allow civilians to be evacuated from Ukraine's besieged port city of Mariupol. The European Development Bank, or EBRD, said the economies of Russia and Ukraine will contract by 10% and 20% respectively this year, as the war between the two countries causes the greatest supply shock for 50 years. And newly declassified American intelligence alleges Vladimir Putin is not receiving accurate information about Russian shortcomings on the battlefield. And the Hubble Space Telescope has peered back to the dawn of cosmic time and detected light from a star that existed within the first billion years after the Big Bang, according to scientists, a new record. Russian forces near Kiev appear to be on the move, but neither Ukraine or the U.S. are buying it as a de-escalation. In fact, officials are saying there were more attacks in the capital, despite Russia's pledge to ease up offensive in the area. With one eye on the battlefield, the other on peace talks, Ukraine's President Zelensky said the signals they hear from the negotiations can be called positive, but they don't drown out the explosions of Russian shells. Take a look.
Є також інші слова, які звучать про нібито відведення російських військ від Києва і Чернігова, про нібито зниження активності окупантів на цих напрямках. Ми знаємо, що це не відведення, а наслідки вигнання, наслідки роботи наших захисників. Але також бачимо, що у цей же час відбувається накопичування російських військ для нових ударів на Донбасі. І до цього ми готуємось. Ми нікому не віримо у жодні красиві словесні конструкції. Є реальна ситуація на полі бою, і зараз це найголовніше. Ми нічого не віддамо.
Ukrainian emergency workers in Irpin retrieved bodies and lined them up in body bags on the street as shelling continues. The mayor of Irpin says at least 200 people have been killed and more than half of the town destroyed in the fierce battle to control the western gateway to the capital. And the Pentagon also said it's too early to say Russian movements is a withdrawal. In fact, Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby said Russia has repositioned a small number of its forces near Kiev, but it's not withdrawing. Take a look.
We have seen over the last 24 hours the repositioning of a small percentage of the troops that and the battalion tactical groups that Russia had arrayed against Kyiv, probably in the neighborhood of 20% of what they had. They are beginning to reposition. Some of those troops we assess are repositioning into Belarus.
Meanwhile, authorities in Chernihiv say this area was shelled all night despite Russia's pledge. AFP reporters also heard frequent explosions coming from the direction of the flashpoint Kiev suburb of Irpin. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry spokesman says there has been a partial movement of Russian troops away from Kiev and Chernihiv, but no mass removal. The Pentagon warns the redeployed troops could be preparing a major offensive elsewhere. And newly declassified American intelligence alleges Vladimir Putin is not receiving accurate information about Russian shortcomings on the battlefield. The White House said that Russian President Vladimir Putin is being misinformed. Take a look.
We obviously have information, which we have now made public, that he felt misled by the Russian military. We believe he's being misinformed by his advisors about how badly the Russian military is performing and how the Russian economy is being crippled by sanctions, because, again, his senior advisors are too afraid to tell him the truth.
The official said Putin had been unaware that conscripts were being deployed to fight in Ukraine, where Russia has suffered huge personnel and equipment losses. An official speaking on condition of anonymity said there is persistent tension between President Putin and the MOD, or the Ministry of Defense, stemming from Putin's mistrust in MOD leadership. Ukrainian forces have been recapturing territory in recent days, including the strategic Kiev suburb of Irpin, as the Russian offensive appears to stall a month after the invasion began on February 24. And the Russian Defense Ministry announced a local ceasefire today to allow civilians to be evacuated from Ukraine's besieged port city of Mariupol. And take a look. These images from Russian state television showing what they say show the distribution of Russian humanitarian aid in Mariupol. A humanitarian corridor, meanwhile, from Mariupol to Zaporizhzhia via the Russian-controlled part of Berdyansk would be opened from 10 a.m., according to the ministry. The ministry's statement said, for this humanitarian operation to succeed, we propose to carry it out with the direct participation of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and the International Committee of the Red Cross. The Russian ministry asked Kiev to guarantee the unconditional respect for the ceasefire through written notification to the Russian side, the UNHCR and the ICRC before 6 a.m. Thursday. Moscow also asked the Ukrainian army to commit to ensure the security of the bus convoys along the designated corridor. And also today, the United Nations says the refugees from Ukraine has now topped 4 million, while most of the women and children, the most vulnerable group, is older Ukrainians. Hundreds of Ukrainian refugees still cross daily into the Republic of Moldova. Take a look.
Мы очень хотим. У нас квартиры, у нас там дома, дачи, ну, все есть. Это ж не то, что мы уехали от радости оттуда.
Конечно. Значит, надежда все-таки.
Нет, мы домой хотим, я аж плачу. Вы что? Все бросить и уехать.
In the meantime, others are going in the opposite direction, returning to Ukraine for goods or just for a few hours to meet friends or pick up personal items. A former Soviet republic of 2.6 million inhabitants, Moldova has so far hosted more than 300,000 refugees. About 100,000 are still there, most of them hoping to soon return to their own country. And the European Development Bank, or EBRD, said the economies of Russia and Ukraine will contract by 10% and 20% respectively this year, as the war between the two countries causes the greatest supply shock for 50 years. Before Russia invaded its pro-Western neighbor on February 24, the London-based European Bank for Reconstruction and Development had been penciling in growth of 3.5% for Ukraine and 3% for Russia. The EBRD, issuing emergency forecasts, said it was the first international financial institution to update its guidance since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine last month. It said the latest prognosis assumed that a ceasefire is brokered within a couple of months, followed soon after by the start of a major reconstruction effort in Ukraine. Under such a scenario, Ukraine's gross domestic product should rebound by 23% next year. But the heavy economic sanctions imposed on Russia by the West would mean that it would register zero growth. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of nationals of former Soviet countries in Central Asia are now facing difficult choices: shrinking work opportunities in Russia and wages in the weakened ruble versus a return to their homeland where they have family homes, but even fewer job prospects. Take a look.
من با مهاجرای صحبت کردم که زیاده از 30 سال سابقه رفتن آمدن به روسیه دارن. اونها میگفتن که روسیه امروز با روسیه قبلی نمیبراید، بسیار وضعیت بد شده است و در اینجا دیگر کار کردن مشکل است. راه یافتن در کار که به اروپا رفت. روسیه را برای کشور کار عوض کردن لازم است در چند ساله نزدیک و دیگر باید به روسیه نیاییم برای کار.
سال 2014 بسرچم طرف روسیه رفتگی استودنتای انا حاضر تاکسی قط کار میکنه، دستافشی کار میکنه. خیلی پیش کمتر سوستار بود میگه حوز یک کمتر مسئله همی وی چقدی انا کمتر سوستار شدگی پول روی کنیش هم کمتر شدگی.
Russia's continuous economic growth during President Vladimir Putin's first 2 terms in office, powered by rising energy prices, set the stage for a swell of migration from countries like Tajikistan, where remittances typically equate to between 1/4 and 2/5 of GDP. But successive economic setbacks, most notably the double whammy of Western sanctions over the Kremlin's first invasion of Ukraine in 2014 and the oil price crash, have led to tighter margins for guest workers feeding families back home. Since Russian forces poured into Ukraine, the ruble has fallen by around 1/5, with Western forecasters predicting an economic contraction of between 5 and 10% this year and a continuing recession next year. And millions of Ukrainians may soon face serious food insecurity because of the ongoing conflict, the UN warned, amid reports that people are facing life and death decisions on whether to leave Mariupol and elsewhere more than a month since the Russian invasion. The alert from the Food and Agriculture Organization follows assessments in 19 of Ukraine's 24 oblasts or regions, which indicated it was uncertain that Ukraine could harvest crops, plant new ones, or sustain livestock production.
The humanitarian crisis is deepening in Ukraine. The level of death, destruction, and suffering that we are witnessing and that is being inflicted on civilians is abhorrent and unacceptable. Today, civilians are taking life and death decisions to flee when there is no ceasefire or other agreements in place that would allow them to leave safely. Time is running out for civilians in Mariupol and in other frontline areas who have now gone for weeks with no humanitarian assistance.
An immediate and worrying finding is that food shortages are expected immediately or in the next 3 months in over 40% of the surveyed areas and cases. When it comes to the all-important production of vegetables, conflict is likely to severely disrupt production for tens of thousands of smallholder farmers, those who have decided to stay behind.
Now, to help support the wider relief effort, FAO has appealed for $50 million, but it's only 10% funded. Nonetheless, it has been possible to support more than 14,600 farming families by providing them with more than 740 tons of urgently needed seed for planting. And noting that the world is facing the highest number of violent conflicts since 1945 and 1/4 of humanity lives in conflict-affected areas, the UN Secretary General said that the war in Ukraine is a catastrophe shaking the foundations of the international order. Take a look.
As detailed in the report, we are facing the highest number of violent conflicts since 1945. From Yemen to Syria, Myanmar and Sudan, from Haiti to the Sahel, and on and on. And now the war in Ukraine, a catastrophe shaking the foundations of the international order, spilling across borders and causing skyrocketing food, fuel and fertilizer prices that spell disaster for developing countries. We are seeing military coups and seizures of power by force. A perilous sense of impunity is taking hold. On the other hand, nuclear arsenals are growing, human rights and international law are under assault, the spirit and letter of the UN Charter are being flouted, criminal and terrorist networks are fooling and profiting from divisions and conflicts, and as always, the poorest, the most vulnerable, pay the highest price. Humanity lives in conflict-affected areas. 2 billion people. Last year, 84 million were forcibly displaced because of conflict, violence, and human rights violations. And this year, we estimate that at least 274 million will need humanitarian assistance. All of this is taking place at a moment of multiplying risks that are pushing peace further out of reach. Inequalities, COVID-19, climate change, cyber threats, to name just a few.
And he ended, as he has recently when he speaks of Ukraine, by saying that a war's toll extends to the global economy and to a lost generation of children whose education and development have been cruelly snatched away. Meanwhile, Russia's widespread and indiscriminate attacks in Ukraine are of immense concern. That is according to the UN rights chief, warning that they could amount to war crimes. Speaking before the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, Michelle Bachelet said her office was investigating claims that civilians in Mariupol had been forcibly evacuated to territory controlled by Russia. Take a look.
For more than 1 month now, the entire population of Ukraine has been enduring a living nightmare. The lives of millions of people are in upheaval as they are forced to flee their homes or hide in basements and bomb shelters as their cities are pummeled and destroyed. Hostilities must stop without delay. Today, I call on the Russian Federation to heed the clear and strong calls of the General Assembly and of this Council and immediately act to withdraw its troops from Ukrainian territory. Indiscriminate attacks are prohibited under international humanitarian law and may amount to war crimes. Civilians are enduring immeasurable suffering, and the humanitarian crisis is critical. In many areas across the country, people urgently need medical supplies, food, water, shelter, and basic household items. Above all, they need the bombs to cease. Looking into allegations that some Mariupol residents have been forcibly evacuated either to territory controlled by Russian-affiliated armed groups or to the Russian Federation.
Now, Russia denies Mariupol residents are being forcibly evacuated to Russia or regions controlled by Russia, saying they voluntarily asked to be evacuated. Meanwhile, Japan has no plans to withdraw from a joint Russian oil and gas project, despite joining tough sanctions on Moscow over its Ukraine invasion. That is according to the Prime Minister Fumio Kishida on today. Kishida said the project was helping to provide long-term, inexpensive, and stable LNG supplies to Japan. He said it is an extremely important project in terms of our energy security, telling the parliamentary session. He said our plan is not to withdraw. Energy resource poor Japan is attempting to balance its need for fossil fuels with towing a hard line on Russia and has faced questions over its continued involvement in the Sakhalin-2 project. After Russia launched its war in Ukraine last month, oil giant Shell said it would sell its 27.5% stake in Sakhalin-2 in Russia's Far East. Japan is heavily dependent on imported fossil fuels, in part because many of its nuclear reactors have been offline since the Fukushima meltdown in 2011. Russia supplies more than 8% of Japan's LNG demands, with Australian exports accounting for about 40% of the Japanese market. In other news, Israeli security forces today raided a West Bank town after 3 deadly attacks rocked the Jewish state in a week, with 2 Palestinians shot dead and a 3rd killed after he launched a knife attack on a bus. Now, the violence comes after a Palestinian armed with an M16 assault rifle killed 5 Israeli civilians in the streets of Bnei Brak, an Orthodox Jewish city near Tel Aviv, on Tuesday night. Now, that shooting took to 11 the number of people killed in the week of violence carried out by Israeli Arabs and Palestinians days before the Muslim month of Ramadan begins. The latest bloodshed erupted on Thursday morning when the Israeli army said its soldiers returned fire after being shot at during an operation to arrest suspects in the West Bank city of Jenin. Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem in the Six-Day War of 1967, and Palestinians seek to end Israel's rule of those territories and build an independent state on the land. Peace talks between Israelis and Palestinians have been frozen for years. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett is opposed to a Palestinian state and instead has pursued a policy of economic easements for Palestinians. And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, Gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Welcome back. Australian journalist Cheng Lei faced a closed-door trial in China after 18 months in detention over accusations of supplying state secrets, with Canberra saying the decision to deny its ambassador access to the hearing was deeply concerning. But diplomats say Chinese authorities have given no further information on the allegations against her. Take a look.
Well, as you've seen, we've just been denied entry into the trial. This is deeply concerning, unsatisfactory and regrettable. We can have no confidence in the validity of a process which is conducted in secret. Nevertheless, we will continue to advocate strongly for Ms. Cheng Lei's rights and interests in accordance with the consular agreement between our two countries.
Now, Cheng, as you see here, a mother of two and a former anchor on Beijing state broadcaster CGTN, has been held in detention since August 2020. In February last year, she was formally arrested for illegally supplying state secrets overseas. Diplomats could not confirm if the trial had begun as scheduled. Cheng could face life imprisonment if deemed to have committed serious violations of China's national security laws. A statement from her lawyer from her family said her two children and elderly parents miss her immensely and sincerely hope to reunite with her as soon as possible. Concerns have swirled in Canberra over her welfare and detention conditions, with Foreign Minister Marise Payne urging China to meet basic standards of justice, procedural fairness, and humane treatment in accordance with international norms. Military personnel from the Armed Forces of the Philippines and the United States today conducted a bilateral amphibious exercise, or Amphibex, in the vicinity of Claveria, Cagayan, as part of this year's Balikatan exercises. Amphibex involves the movement of assault amphibious vehicles, or AAVs, from landing class ships to shore. It also requires the vertical insertion of troops using different air assets of both armed forces. The activity demonstrated the bilateral forces' ability to seize a littoral objective as part of a complex combined arms operations between Philippine and U.S. ground, naval, and aviation assets. This year's Balikatan showcased several modern AFP assets, such as the Black Hawk helicopters, AAVs, and the BRP Tarlac. These assets were acquired through the ongoing AFP modernization program. In other news, the U.S. Geological Survey said a magnitude 7.0 earthquake struck east of the French territory of New Caledonia, triggering tsunami warnings for some Pacific islands that officials later said were no longer in effect. The USGS said the tremor struck at 4:44 p.m. local time at a depth of 10 kilometers, 279 kilometers, southeast of Tadine, New Caledonia. It initially gave the magnitude of 6.8 before revising it up. The U.S. National Weather Service issued a warning that waves less than 0.3 meters over the tide level were expected along the coast of Vanuatu, Fiji, and New Caledonia. It later said the threat had passed, and an AFP journalist said the earthquake did not cause any damage in New Caledonia. In other news, the wanted star and singer Tom Parker has died at the age of 33 after being diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. Our correspondent from the United Kingdom, Ryan Florentino, reports from London.
Tom Parker, one of 5 members of British-Irish boy band The Wanted, died on Wednesday, aged 33, less than 2 years after revealing he was suffering from an inoperable brain tumor. The singer from Northwest England announced the diagnosis in October 2020 and, after undergoing treatment, joined the rest of the band on a reunion tour in March. But his actress wife, Kelsey Hardwick, wrote on Instagram, "It is with the heaviest of hearts that we confirm Tom passed away peacefully earlier today, with all of his family by his side." Singer Ed Sheeran also posted on Instagram, "So sad to hear of Tom's passing. Thoughts and love are with Kelsey, his children, and his family. Very sad day. What a lovely guy." The remaining 4 bandmates said, "He was our brother. Words can't express the loss and sadness that we feel. Always and forever in our hearts." The couple of Tom Parker and Kelsey Hardwick married in 2018 and had 2 small children, including one born after his diagnosis. Formed in 2009, The Wanted had #1 singles in Britain with titles such as All Time Low and Glad You Came, the latter also reaching #3 in the US Billboard chart. Reporting from the United Kingdom, I'm Ryan Florentino, and we live in interesting times.
Meanwhile, action hero Bruce Willis, star of the Die Hard franchise, is to retire from acting due to his illness, according to his family announcing this Wednesday. Bruce has been experiencing some health issues and has recently been diagnosed with aphasia, which is impacting his cognitive abilities, according to a post on Instagram signed by his family. As a result, they said, of this, and with much consideration, Bruce is stepping away from the career that has meant so much to him. According to the Mayo Clinic, aphasia often occurs after a stroke or head injury and robs you of the ability to communicate. While it's normally caused by a specific one-time event such as a stroke, there are other possibilities such as from a neurodegenerative disease or a growing tumor, explained Brenda Rapp, a cognitive scientist at Johns Hopkins University. In such cases, the damage is progressive and therapy focuses on preventing further loss of function. Willis's family did not share the cause of his diagnosis in their statement. And finally, in our news, the Hubble Space Telescope has peered back to the dawn of cosmic time and detected light from a star that existed within the first billion years after the Big Bang. That is, according to scientists, a new record, according to astronomers Wednesday. The newly discovered star, called Earendel, is so far away, its light has taken 12.9 billion years to reach Earth, when the universe has 7% its current age. We almost didn't believe it at first. It was so much farther than the previous most distant, according to astronomer Brian Welch of Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, lead author of a paper in Nature describing the discovery. The previous record holder was detected in 2018 when the universe was 4 billion years old. That is, according to scientists. And because the universe is expanding, by the time light from distant stars reaches us, it is stretched to longer, redder wavelengths, a phenomenon called redshift. Earendel's light came from an era called redshift 6.2. The galaxy hosting the star has been naturally magnified and distorted by an effect called gravitational lensing. This is when a massive object in between the observer and the thing they're looking at bends the fabric of space-time so that rays of light coming from the target object that were diverging are bent back towards the observer. As always, I'll end the day on a thoughtful note. Our ability to look back and smile at our past is proof that God's plan is to keep us moving forward. This has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay alert, stay informed, because we live in interesting times. Good night.